Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters this restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Pinerger, but actually it's a Mormon Media Reviews where we cover any media outside of books, goes under the MMR banner, and the frequent co-host, or the co-host with the mostest, Rebecca Biblioteca, joins me today. How are you doing today?
I am well today, Steve. The sun is shining in Utah where I am. We've had about 2,000 inches of snow, but the sun is finally out, so it's all good.
Well, that's great. Are you worried about any avalanches coming your way, or are you safe from
Uh, Flooding, unfortunately, when people pray for moisture and they get moisture and then they get more and more moisture, I can't even say it. Yeah, there's definitely some flooding danger that we'll be facing in the coming months. So we're gearing up, sandbags at the ready.
Okay, so thoughts and prayers for all of our friends in Utah for this impending flood situation that you will be experiencing. I know there's similar things going to happen in California. It is quite scary during these times, so let's just keep everybody in our thoughts during this period of time. I'm entering hurricane season in a couple months, so in Florida.
I
So,
remember last year, Steve, when you gave a blow-by-blow, daily
yep,
news report, Steve and the hurricane, that was very riveting. So I hope
yes,
you're okay and everybody.
through it. We'll get through it. All right, so we have this special guest here, and I'm really excited because we wanted to do something. We've actually been talking for a few months now about having this guest on, who was actually neighbors with the Daybells and is also somebody who's keeping a very close tabs on the Lori Vallow murder trial happening right now in Idaho. And I just want to welcome for the very first time, who is one, a very good friend of mine, who two, when I was in last time I was in Missouri, actually gave me my ride back to the airport. And three, her and her husband are very, very big fans of mine. She told me that they got introduced to me by doing here my appearance on Mormon Stories, and you told me that you had seen. Not only did you listen to it once, but you listened to it twice. So almost 24 hours of Steve Pinerger going through your truck. You and your husband watching it. Bernadine McCandless, welcome to the show today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I'm no, really, thank you. I'm excited to do this, Steve. I think so much of you, and I'm just excited to talk to you.
It's very exciting to meet you, and of course, I got to meet very coincidentally, one of those coincidences that always seems to happen when I'm in Utah.
Yes.
By golly, I say I'm at Moon's Rare Books, and guess what? You're like, hey, I'm just down the road, and I got a couple books for you that I just got at the thrift store. And what was so cool was then we met your son, who's a returned missionary, and he got to meet David Snell, the host of Saints Unscripted, who picked me up at Moon's Rare Books because we were going to have lunch together. So he was all like starry-eyed, and so that was just
Yes.
kind of a cool convergence of things that came together. It's so cool to have you in my life, Bernadine, and experience these experiences with you.
Thank you. And you add so much to our lives, in the truck. So we're truckers, and we listen to a lot of YouTube, and because it's something to do, interesting, and um, we love listening to you. And so you're on, our notifications soon as, oh, good, here's something new from Steve. We just think you should do a whole lot more so that, we have hours of it every day.
Just 3 a week, folks. 3 a week. That's a lot of work. Well,
Yeah.
thanks again, Bernadine. But that's just to give you guys a little context here. So Bernadine actually is originally from what was referred to as Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, and you also spent some time living in South Africa, hence the accent. And just, I wanted to ask you, were you born and raised in Mormonism, or were you a convert into it?
No, I'm a convert. So we lived in Rhodesia. One night, my dad came home during the war and said, get your clothes, mom's sewing machine, get in the car, we're leaving. Left everything. And when we crossed the border into South Africa, he prayed that we would find God, a church. And I was Methodist, and our family was Methodist. We went to a couple of different, couldn't find the right church. For a long story. Maybe I can tell you another time. I don't want to take up all the time on it, but we ended up getting half a month's rent free in an apartment building because we'd been living on the beach. And the man who gave us the rent half off, my mom wanted to buy him liquor, and he says, oh, I'm Mormon, I don't drink. So that afternoon we had pamphlets, and 3 weeks later we were baptized. And so which changed our family in a very dramatic way, because South Africans love to drink. They love to, it's meat and beer, and not American type beer either. Like, it actually has an alcohol content to it. And so it changed our lives a lot. And so I've been a member of the church since 1976. So spent most of that in Idaho. I went to college in Idaho. And then I lived 10 years in Utah and then back to Idaho again.
So when did you move to the United States?
In 1984.
Okay, so you've been here for
Came over in 83. We were sealed in the temple, went back, and I came back to college in 84.
Okay, so that's background. Already, Rebecca, you can tell we're going to have her back on. Sounds like she has an interesting story.
Oh, yeah, this is only the tip of the iceberg. I can tell that already for sure. Let's schedule it now, Steve. Get out your pipe.
But that gives you a little bit of background, and
yeah,
you're in Idaho, so you're like in the Mormon Corridor.
Yes.
Was that deliberate? Did your family deliberately want to move you where more Mormons were, or did you just have to be there?
No, I went on a tour of BYU when I came over in 83. And my dad was like, you should go to a Mormon school. And I did not want to leave South Africa. But I came over and I went to Rick's College instead.
Oh.
And that's how I ended up in Idaho. And then I met a boy in college and got married and had 9 children and just did the Mormon thing,
That is the Mormon thing. You described it right there.
Yeah. And so, part of my journey is the whole shelf collapsing, trying to decide what I believe in. Part of my whole thing has been, part of my problem is the Lori Vallow thing. And it has affected me in ways that has really had me look a lot at the culture, because there isn't the culture in South Africa. It's the religion. You only meet Mormons on Sunday when you're at church, right? In Utah and Idaho, it's 24 hours a day or whatever, school, whatever. Your kids are in school with other Mormons. It's very, very different. And even Missouri versus Utah and Idaho is different. And so one of the first questions I was asked when Lauren Matthias did that interview with me on Hidden True Crime was, how could this happen, right? I was like, oh, easy. The culture that we create just brews this cesspool of fear and, the whole end of days and the emergency preparedness stuff and the little meetings and some of the things that we hear in the temple are about, finding out the mysteries for ourselves and, all this sort of stuff. And so I was very frustrated because I'm like, okay, I can see how these people went there. I can see very, very clearly how these people just went, well, they took steps that were, I think a lot of ego got involved, lust, sex, the whole money, however the prosecutor started off the trial the other day, I absolutely, but it's been really interesting because I used to do energy work. I was involved in the energy healing side of things, Vienna Steibel and the theta healing stuff. And so I was an instructor. I did all of that for years. And, but then somebody gave me the Julie Rowe book and I read the first page and I was like, this is trash. Why would somebody believe this stuff? This woman, I had a visceral reaction to it. Like I knew right off the bat, this is not good. And then the Visions of Glory book, with Spencer, same reaction with that. I'm like, I don't know why anybody would want to read this, and so for me, there was a line, but then the church started saying things about energy work. They didn't like people doing energy work, and I didn't back away from it, but I closed up my practice. And because I actually had a building and, and so I pulled away that way and said, there was a lot of drama among energy workers also, and I didn't like it, and so I backed away completely. And then the emotion code started, and that felt very weird to me because it goes into this whole generational thing, right? And I do believe some energy work does have to do with, some of that. We have our ancestors' DNA. So if there's trauma, yeah, maybe it is there, but it seemed like there was another level to it, and it sounds like I've been following this trial pretty much everything I could possibly read from the day that I remember we were in North Dakota, and I was still on my ward's Facebook group. And when Tammy posted, had this strange experience happen tonight, I'm unpacking my car, and somebody tried to shoot at me with a paintball gun, and I remember thinking, now which little twits, and then so-and-so has sons and so-and-so has sons, and none of those kids would dare do that, go shoot Tammy with a paintball gun.
You were that close to the situation that when Tammy put out the, oh my gosh, somebody tried to shoot me, you had access to that. That was your ward Facebook. You got that message and tried to figure out who in the ward. Wow, that is close to the situation. My goodness.
Yeah. And then 2 weeks later, Tammy was dead. And I said to Reed, oh my gosh, Tammy is dead. I wonder if it had something to do with that paintball thing, Now, so I'll back up a minute. I lived there at an intersection. I was at the next road left, and we had 12 acres there, and we were having a massive dispute with our neighbor, and his name is Eldon Clausen, okay, which is where a lot of that interview that I did was about. And he just terrorized us. It was awful. And one day, it was Memorial Day, I heard this banging, like fence post banging, like using a T-post pounder, and went back clear to the back of the property. And there were members of our bishopric helping him tear out the fence and taking 40 feet of our property across it was hundreds and hundreds of feet, because he decided it belonged to him. And I was already at odds with the church, and that's part of the other story we can talk about another time. And I got the cops, and I was like, no way, this isn't going to happen. But it was a very bad situation with Eldon Clausen. And he would let our horses out. He would steal food. He was known in the ward to, they would give him a calling in the ward to keep him at church, because that's when he would go into people's homes. And I had a friend, another Tammy across the street, who was home one day because she was ill, and he just opened the door. And she said, what are you doing? He goes, oh, I'm looking for a shovel. He was coming to take whatever he needed. So anyway, it became too much. We tried settling it, and we ended up moving to Island Park. And so the people who bought our place was Chad's brother and his wife, Heather. And she has interviews where she talks quite in depth about what happened.
Those,
right?
Yeah.
And then when we were done in Island Park, we moved back to that ward. And at that point, my younger three were in high school, and they became very good friends with the Chad Daybell's kids and Tammy's kids. And so they were in speech and debate. So one of my sons, Caleb, was partnered with Leah on the debate team, and they would do debate. And Mark, the youngest one, ended up going on his mission to South Africa. So we talked a couple of times before he left, and I sent him a couple of things when he was on his mission, and Tammy actually died while Mark was in South Africa. And so my kids were really, especially Gabriel, the youngest one. In fact, we were talking a couple of weeks ago, and he was just like, it's so sick, Mom. It's just, I sat at that fire pit. I went to their house and had bonfires. We sat at that fire pit, the one where Tylee was burned, you know, and there's this little pond over there. And he goes, I know the pond. I know where they buried the JJ, you know. So it's interesting because I often wonder, all those kids were good friends. They all went to high school together. Seth, one of Chad's older kids, was a student teacher for my kids. And so I knew, you know, they would always, well, Seth was my student teacher today, not student teacher, substitute teacher, you know, so there was a lot of interaction. I didn't know Chad and Tammy very well. I met them at school things or at church things, you know, but I was never, my kids kept me so busy. I was more acquaintances with anybody than I ever was friends with anybody. Do you know what I mean?
Right. That's the Mormon way for sure. Were you aware, or were people in the community aware of, I mean, at that point, Chad has his publishing company. He was definitely writing those books with more of an end of a day spin to them. I mean, what did people say in the ward? Oh, there goes Chad. He's kind of got a groupies and I mean, what did people think? Or did people not know at all? Because it's such a subculture, you know, he was huge in the subculture, but
nobody knew at all.
Okay.
But knowing the people that were involved now, the things that we used to talk about, for instance, Eldon Clausen's wife, okay, Shirley, she was, I love herbal medicine. Okay, I will go harvest herbs all day long. That's like my favorite thing to go do. So she and I had quite a few conversations about that, but it seemed like, okay, that's just a little too much. Do you know what I mean? Like, there was always this over the edge stuff. I believed in food storage, and I grew all my own food, and we slaughtered our own animals and stuff. But the stockpile insanity stuff, it was the people I noticed that were involved were always over the edge with it. And Shirley Clausen, her husband, did life insurance. And the second policy that Chad bought on
Tammy,
this is dying, on Tammy, he bought from them.
Oh, what a connection! My goodness.
Yeah, and so after nope, it's not charging.
Pitfalls of being on the road, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, but I thought I charged it up today. But
well, we'll go until you die.
Okay. Yeah, it's not charging at all, and I'm not sure why. But we've been in a lot of humidity, and then it says to me, you're putting in a wet cord, and I'm like, no, I'm not, you know. But anyway, after Tammy died, Shirley Clausen actually helped Chad fill out the paperwork to submit that on that life insurance stuff. And her husband was a self-imposed water master. My husband's so good at helping me find the right words. And there was a ditch right along that fence where JJ was buried. And Eldon was always walking those ditches. Yes, thank you. Was always walking those ditches. And a week after JJ, the last time we see him, Eldon died of the same thing they initially said Tammy died of.
A heart incident, some kind of cardiac incident.
Right. And a pulmonary embolism or whatever they called it. Right. And I think this is just Bernadine, right? I think because he noticed if you dug a hole in your yard, it was ridiculous. And I think that he noticed and they had to do away with him. And I've told Fremont County that, you know, and they're like, yeah, Platesville, you know.
Wow. No, so I can see that. I've been to the property down there, and I know what you mean. There's that ditch that goes right along, and then you go a few feet further in, and then you're there where the site where everything was discovered. So, and it sounds like he was a curious person and a person who's
Oh,
not afraid to be
Nosy.
invasive. So it sounds
yes.
like if there were a secret or something that he didn't understand, he would dive right in, and that would be the
Oh,
last
yeah.
thing they would need happening. Oh my goodness. But law enforcement has never, they're probably so
No.
inundated with what's there already. I mean, how many
Right.
bodies are already piled up around this scenario with the husband and the brother? And wow, this is so do you have any, I know that his children seem to be supportive of him even
Hmm.
through these trials and things. Do your kids still have any contact, or do you have any or nothing, just
No,
what you've
I
heard
asked
through the
Gabriel.
ward? Or
No, no. Gabriel, well, and one of the reasons I think too is I've been outspoken, because on Facebook they really
yes,
went after me. They're like, shut your
yes.
mouth, you know. But
Oh,
Gabriel,
that
I
code of
asked him.
silence.
Oh, it is thick. And, you know, and
Yeah.
it is kind of interesting because I've talked to a couple of close friends, and I mean, one of them, she said to me, well, I was speaking to so and so, and they were at one of Chad's meetings, and the husband and wife were standing together right there. And Chad told her that he had been married to her in a previous life. You know, one of
Someone
his,
else's wife he used that
yeah.
line on? Oh
And
my
the
goodness.
husband
Yeah,
was
because that's what
standing,
got Lori too. Yeah, and with the
right.
husband right there.
Yeah.
Well, there is
And
precedence for that in church history,
well,
if we're
exactly.
honest. So,
Yeah.
oh my goodness.
Yeah.
But so
And that's,
you sense that there, because we've heard that, articles have come out, letters have been written to wards, do not speak, do not say.
mhm.
So that's a real thing,
Oh, yeah.
whether imposed culturally by the ward or actual instructions. No one is supposed to talk about any details, because people do know, like you said, it's a very close community. So that's real. That's a real thing,
Oh,
that cone of
yes.
silence. Okay.
Oh, I absolutely, I absolutely believe that there is, and it's,
Wow.
and it annoys me. It really annoys me because I feel like, when I was in college in Rexburg, a girl was, I don't want to say the R word, because I know it defunds your pages and things, RAP, she was, and man, I'll tell you what, that college shut it down. The town shut it down. And there's a lot of stuff that goes on in Rexburg, where one of my children was molested in high school. The police lost the report twice. They lost the video report. I mean, and it's because they were insured by the same people the school district was insured by, So there's a lot of nonsense that I think goes on. And I think that after this all broke, I think it was Elder Holland went to Rexburg, and everybody was so traumatized. They were hoping that he was going to say something, and he said nothing.
Mm. Yeah, they
And
can't weigh in. It's too charged.
it offended a lot of people. It really offended a lot of people. But people suddenly up and moved. One of my sons is a resource officer, and he goes, we suddenly were having to check on children that no longer were coming to school, and they had just up and moved. They were
They just
involved in all
left.
this. Yeah. And so, he said that they were interviewing, stakes were pulling people and interviewing people. There were thousands of people that were involved either with Chad or similar type things,
Yeah, well, the
because
whole subculture is so huge. And
mhm,
it's interesting to me to see, and you've probably noticed this, Steve, just the world looking at Idaho right there and what's going on and how they kind of interpret it. And it's so different to them. And also the frustration with how the trial, why can't there be cameras? Why can't there be media?
right,
They don't understand the culture. So they don't
right,
understand how it operates at all, and I'll read these news stories and think, oh, you don't, how could they get it though? How could they really
right.
understand? So
They can't. And and going to the trial, there's a bunch of Twitter people that I follow that are in the courtroom,
right, like
Lauren
Lauren, I
McBride,
think you
one of
mentioned.
them.
Are you following
Yeah.
Lauren quite a
And
bit? Yeah,
Nate
she's,
Eaton, and
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And and Pretty Lies and Alibis, she's another
yes,
good one to follow. And
yes.
she puts up these emojis about the looks on the jurors' faces as they're presented with this stuff is absolute, because this is new to them,
Right.
and it just keeps getting more and more
Yeah.
bizarre. But we can see, yeah, I could see where that comes from. Yeah,
That's the thing.
yeah.
We can connect the dots on that. And I've been surprised too how many friends of mine don't know some of the what you'd call deeper doctrine, you know, especially about like a multiple mortalities and plural probations, which Joseph Smith
Right.
actually was very interested in at the time of his death. Eliza R. Snow was also very interested, you know, and that's where, like you said, these people, these groups take it to the next level,
Right.
you know, and then a level beyond that.
Yes.
So it definitely has shown a
Yes.
spotlight on just some things that people were never aware of.
Right.
I want to say a
Yes.
couple of things. First of all, just so
Yes.
everybody knows, Rexburg is the home. Now, you went to what was called Ricks College, but now it's called BYU Idaho. So
Mhm.
Rexburg
Right.
is a college town that is, it's a church-run school now, BYU Idaho. It's always been, but they just changed the name. And so that adds to the culture of this whole thing. There's a lot to unpack here, and I know our time is limited, but I also think it's important that we also kind of, because it's interesting to me. On one of my trips to Utah, I was talking to a TBM, a well-known TBM, who was quoting the Julie Rowe prophecies still after
Yeah.
all this time. And I was like, so maybe just talk a little bit about who was Julie Rowe. And I know you said when you first read it, was like, and then of course in her relationship with Chad, because he actually didn't he publish her books? Is that was his publishing company?
Yeah, he did. And
Yeah.
they were all in Deseret book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
So talk a
Yeah.
little bit about Julie Rowe and Chad, and then I want us to kind of talk a little bit more about the cultural stuff, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the trial too.
Okay. Do you want me to talk about it?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Go
Just a little
ahead. You're
background.
closer to it
Okay.
than any of us, I think.
Yeah.
You are right there in the
Okay.
trenches. My goodness.
So Julie Rowe had a near-death experience, apparently. Okay. Now I have read her biography, her autobiography, and I think she had serious emotional problems from when she was very young. And I, you know, you hate to say, well, I don't think you had a near-death experience, right? But I think that she had some experiences, and as she got some attention, she expounded on them. Okay. But then it seems like I think there was Suzanne Freeman. Did she publish hers before Julie Rowe? Do you remember, Reed? She's another one. And I believe she might have published hers before Julie Rowe, because Suzanne Freeman, at least Chad Daybell's book, she said he just copied things that I talked about, right? And so I think that a lot of these people kind of like were feeding off of each other. So Chad Daybell started publishing Julie Rowe's books, and they were a hit. She was selling thousands of these books, right? And then Chad decided he was going to write books too. Yeah. And
then he remembered his own near-death experiences, right?
Suddenly,
that no
his
one in the
family
family was aware of. So
yeah, they're like, what? Since when?
Yeah,
right? But,
since when?
Suzanne Freeman seems like, when I've listened to her interviews, like if I was going to believe any of them, I would probably believe her story. Do you know what I mean? But then the rest of them, I don't. And, you know, it's crazy.
And the whole concept behind the near-death experience is that once you've had that, then you're closer, sort of to the other side. You maybe channel power, you have connections, the veil is very thin. And so then people start following you because you're this person that's had these incredible experiences. You have access to this hidden knowledge, which of course we know that we're all primed to look for, you know, that we want to find hidden knowledge. And so then you become sort of a superhero in that group, and then you can abuse that. And I think that's what happened here. But you can, and like you said, Bernadine, you can see the steps that take you to that. Absolutely.
Right. You know, we're taught to listen to the spirit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so these people are all, that's interesting is their church is the Church of the Firstborn, right? Which goes way back. You know, I can't remember. I'd have to go. I forget historical information quickly, but it seems like it was around Joseph Smith's time, wasn't it? Do you remember, Steve? Church of the Firstborn?
Are we
But
talking about the New Israelites or a group like
no,
that? Is that?
one of the groups way back then, way back Joseph Smith's time, was called Church of the Firstborn. So he's actually, Chad's taken that name from back then, saying that he is restoring that church, you know. But Chad also, Zulemas texted me this week, he believed that in one probation he was the Holy Ghost, and in another probation he was James the Just, Jesus's brother.
Yeah.
And so one of the Godhead, right? And so and then he believes he's one. And so there's, I think, sometimes I wonder, okay, what do they actually believe? Like, who actually believed this stuff, right? And it seems like Lori Vallow came into the situation already believing the mortal probation stuff. She met Chad Daybell, and he was a horn dog. And so he had to figure out how he was going to get this gorgeous blonde woman, right? And she wanted the spiritual giant.
Yes.
And so, you know, it was just.
Yeah, and
I
he
think
told her she was a goddess. You
she
know,
was
he
a
told her she was a
goddess.
goddess. And especially being a woman in the church, and she was somebody with a huge personality, I feel like she was always pushed down. You know, she was never heard, she was never seen, she never had any
Right.
power. Well, here's this man that says, you know who you are? You're a goddess, you were my wife,
Right.
you were the partner of Moroni. I mean, who
Right.
doesn't want to hear that?
I
Right. And then
know.
you get swept
I
away in
know.
it. So
And one of her more probations was that she was also Emma Smith in a previous life too, right? Wasn't that?
That's right. And and Julie Rowe was Joan of Arc and Mary
Yes.
Magdalene, I believe.
Yeah, everyone's always someone amazing. You never say, sure, I was
Yeah, I know.
reincarnated, but I was just a mudslinger in the pyramid. No, you're never that. You're somebody absolutely fabulous. You can't
That's
just be a
right.
common person.
Yeah, it is really insane, you know. And then, you know, I think that one of the things that the manipulation that happened with this whole situation, her getting her brother involved, who really seems to me like he had some really low self-esteem, to believe that because she said and Chad said, you're this great warrior, you're, you know, he had to live up to it, you know.
Yeah.
And I was listening to something about Chad gave him a patriarchal blessing.
Did you listen to that? Oh my goodness.
And you know what, I can't remember the exact words, but he says something like, you will know when it's time for you to die.
Yes.
And they exhumed Tammy's body, and the next day Alex dies. You know? And I think that's when he knew the gig's up.
Yeah,
and he was on the phone with Chad, you know, and Chad was saying, you know,
it's time. And he was also told over and over that he was a protector. He was the
Yes.
warrior. He had to do what it took, you know, and so that was his role. He absolutely, I believe,
Porter
did whatever.
Rockwell.
Yes, he was the Porter Rockwell of the modern day. Absolutely. And so that's exactly right. I think he did what it took, what they told him it took in that weird warped scenario. And then when it was time that he needed to bow out because he's a liability, then I think he did it. So that patriarchal blessing, if you haven't listened to that, Steve, there's not too many things more disturbing than that. I mean, again, why is Chad giving a patriarchal blessing? I mean, why is Chad? Well, because Chad is, you know, a demigod, I guess.
Right. Yeah. You know, and I think I've read a few statements where people are saying he reminds them of Warren Jeffs when he's giving that patriarchal blessing, you know.
Yeah.
And but you know, it amazes me that people can cold-bloodedly do this. Like, even if she didn't hands-on kill her own children, how do you suddenly, even 2 days later, a week later, or the day after, be joyful and going to Hawaii and not worried about where they're at, you know, or although I firmly believe that she was very involved in it. But I don't know how you justify that spiritually, even with the crossover on some of our beliefs, Mormon beliefs versus Church of the Firstborn or whatever they were doing. I don't know how you justify that, especially the way the kids were killed.
Yeah.
You know, it
Yeah, that's the
just,
most heartbreaking part of the trial, is to have that information come out. And I sort of feel like they justified it by saying, sure, their mortal bodies have to go. They have to
right,
go because we have to save their spirits, you know, and figuratively, metaphorically, that's a concept in
yeah,
the Mormon dogma that, you know, I must shun my child because he's not doing what's right. I'm going to shun his existence here to save him in the next life. We see that over and over. Of
right,
course, this is a very horrific, you know, version of that, but the concept exists that you sometimes have to put people you love through pain in order
right.
to save their soul. That's kind of my personal take on it. But yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely horrifying.
Well, and for me now, you know, it's like, okay, so because I'd always thought, okay, how do you become perfect in one existence? Right? How we're supposed to achieve this perfection to be able to be a god in the next life, right? Which the church doesn't teach anymore, right? They
Exactly.
scrapped that off the website, right?
We're done with that.
And
they
we're done
never
with
said
that.
that.
Yeah, not sure when that happened anymore, but
Never
you
said.
know,
I don't know
and
where you got
so,
that idea.
yeah. And so, you know, it's like, okay, so do we come back as start as a rock and then as a puppy and then I don't know, you know. So there's always that idea in the back of your mind, right?
Right.
But nobody's ever going to go there. And then something, you know, you start thinking, well, okay, so maybe, you know, maybe we do come back. Maybe there's something to Buddhism. Maybe, you know, there's a little bit of truth in everything.
Sure.
So there's always these questions going through your head. And then something like this happens and you're like, oh, the prophet says that we should only listen to what they say, not to anybody else. Gosh, there's a reason for that.
There's a
You know?
reason for that. That's true.
Yeah.
However,
So
most people don't know that our founding prophet was extremely curious about this and wrote about this and talked to people, talked to at least 3 of his wives, including Eliza R. Snow, about this, to the point where Eliza was so involved that Brigham Young had to say, knock it off. You know, we don't want this in our church, because I think he saw how problematic it was. So
yeah,
it does make you wonder. It's there. If you want to look for it, it's there. The
it's
justification is there for those views. So,
right.
So I just wanted to say that, you know, of course, you guys have been keeping up with this a lot more than I have, but I was reading this past week was the first week of the trial. And I think we should just move on to talk a little bit about the trial, what's happened this past week. I think first of all, just the idea that they exhumed her body and found out it wasn't, you know, a cardiac thing, but it was asphyxiation. But then we have the graphic. I was just reading about the kids' bodies and the conditions that they were in, it was so shocking to me. The depravity was beyond anything I realized. So maybe talk a little bit about what we've seen and learned about this whole thing this past week. Both of you chime in on this.
Yeah, go ahead first, Bernadine. Like I said,
You
you
know,
are so close to this. It's crazy.
I absolutely agree. When you think about the actual, so JJ, you know, the way that he was bound, duct tape over duct tape, plastic across his face, plastic bag, more across his face. You only do that to somebody who's alive. And then Zulema this week said, well, they had a 2-minute window, right? Binding was one way, burning was one way, dismembering was another way. Okay. So from when they killed somebody to destroyed the body, whether it was binding, burning, or dismembering, they had 2 minutes to do it in, or another evil spirit would get into that body again. And then once again, the spirit's in limbo. And just that information made it so much more horrific for me.
Right.
Because you, especially with Tylee, okay, with JJ, Lauren says, was it Lauren or Gigi said that the way his leg was pulled up, they could tell he actually tried to get out of his restraint, right? Tylee, oh my gosh, like, I don't know how you do that. how,
Yeah, to a grown adult-sized person. I mean, that's the
right,
thing. JJ was a little kid. You can overpower him, but Tylee must have just fought for her life. It's just horrifying.
right. And Lori actually made a statement, and it was within a day of when they believed Tylee disappeared, apologizing to her neighbors for the loud music or whatever that had happened the previous night. And so I wonder if we're going to hear more about that, because does that mean Tylee was fighting and yelling
Yeah,
and
it
trying
sounds like
to,
a cover story. Yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
yeah, you know?
Uh,
And but then also, her saying to Zulema, oh, Zulema said that we're doing a casting while Charles, the husband she killed, was driving down the road with JJ in the car, and I'm
right.
like, okay, how are you okay doing a casting knowing you're gonna kill a zombie and a child?
Right. That's the thing. It's just like out of a science fiction fantasy book. I mean, the idea that they thought these women could get together, cast their energy to kill someone, Lori's former husband. That's what, the casting is. And then of
Right,
course he's in the car. And what would happen if that worked?
right,
And he died and
yeah,
JJ's there. They did not care. I believe at this point they didn't see anyone in their life as an actual human being. They didn't have any sensibility left of humanity. I don't
right,
think, because otherwise, how would you
no,
be able to think about that? I don't think
right,
they saw it that way.
yeah, and how do you move on with your life?
Yeah.
How do
And
you,
go to
you know,
Hawaii and smile.
right, yeah, I was saying to Reed, we deliver food to prisons, and so we get to see some pretty, Angola down in Louisiana was quite the trip. Okay.
Wow.
And I was saying to Reed, I think that the hell of committing a crime like this would be, okay, we all speak to process things, right? We go through a traumatic thing and we find somebody to talk to. Oh my gosh, you won't believe what happened to me today, right?
Right.
The hell would be committing a crime and not being able to process. So it stays in your head. Eventually, that's got to do something to you. Do you know what I mean? If you're in prison, you can't confess to anybody. If you don't, and if you're out on the open, eventually it's got to eat you alive, And I look at Lori like her she wanted to leave. She didn't want to be present while they discussed what had happened to the kids. I was like, oh, good. You know what? I hope it starts to eat at your brain, because right now they're giving her these drugs. She keeps laying her head down on the table and going to sleep.
Yeah. Yes. Isn't that an unusual? I think that's a self-defense mechanism. I think she's in her fantasy. And if anything breaks in, as far as how could you even live with yourself if you suddenly realized what had really happened? You have to keep that fantasy going. And your brain is going to do that for you. It's the only way to survive, because it's unconscionable.
Yeah.
That's what I think. She's checking out because of that, psychologically.
Yeah. So I think that they have created a hell.
Yeah, absolutely.
For themselves.
Yep, absolutely.
And Zulema, and at least Zulema is saying, I really believed all this stuff. The Melanie Gibbs stuff, well, I didn't really believe in it. Okay, you were praying and casting that somebody was gonna die.
Right.
And they died.
And
And
maybe we should explain who Zulema is. She's one of the other women who believed in this, and they would work together to try to cast spells, basically. Yeah.
Right. And she married Alex Cox.
Yes.
Lori's brother. And he died 12 days later, because they were one of the 144,000 that were going to be allowed, So Chad and Lori were picking who was going to be 144,000 and who was going to be married to who,
Unbelievable.
There we go.
You understand why there's so much international interest in this. You just can't even, and then we have an extra level or layer to it, understanding more of the doctrine and how they were raised and what they might have thought. But it just doesn't stop. I just can't even imagine what else is going to come out in the trial.
It's unbelievable. And one thing I want to say too, folks, is like, let me put it this way. We can't just put this at the feet of Mormonism and say this is a result of Mormonism. My Christian tradition also has to take some responsibility.
Mhm.
144,000,
Yeah.
all this kind of stuff comes straight from Revelation. So the apocalyptic mindset is there are many groups within Christianity that have done similar horrible things in the name of
Mhm.
Christianity and in the name of the Bible. So those of you who are like haters, no, this isn't just
Yeah.
this is a religion thing in general.
That's
Yes.
true.
But
Very true.
and
100%.
the religion can inform these cults, which it typically does, and it's going to evolve in a certain particular way within the culture that you are, especially in Idaho, which represents a much more conservative brand of Mormonism as well. And you do have other splinter groups that are active out there too, mostly from the right. It's just kind of fascinating to see what's going on there. And so, yeah, it's just amazing to think that this happened. But it should give us all a pause, right? And realize the
Yeah.
religious extremism in any form needs to be, we need to stop it. We need to not allow something like that to flourish. Not to say we're going to have the government stop, but as individuals, we're
No,
responsible for religious rhetoric that's hateful or that's destructive or that's manipulative. That stuff needs to be called out from the start so they don't end up doing this kind of thing. I'm sorry.
right. Right. No, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, heaven help us if we were still practicing blood atonement, who knows, what, as far as the penalties that we used to have in the temple, right? I had an interesting conversation with Gabriel the other day when he said, Mom, have you gone since they made the latest changes? And I said, no, I haven't gone. And he goes, man, it's kind of weird. And I'm like, oh, Gabriel, you should see how it started for me 35, 40 years ago, you'd be pretty surprised. Actually, way more than that.
Yeah.
35 years, yeah, it was a long time. And I told him, and he goes, no way, Mom, and but I think too, for me, the way this is settling for me is it's going back to, and I think I told you this in Salt Lake, Stephen, is reading Psalms. I just had to pick something because I felt like I was going to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I don't know where I'm at as far as the church right now, because I feel like there's so much denial, but I know that I believe in a God and that things are right and things are wrong, Yeah. And I just had to start reading Psalms. And the thing that kept standing out to me is almost every scripture is about peace, finding peace or asking God for peace or, and that's where I'm at for me with this,
Well, you can't go wrong reading the Psalms. That's beautiful, Bernadine. Thanks for sharing that. I know this is also part of your faith journey. There's a lot going on. You and I have had multiple conversations about your journey that you're on, and many of you all are on journeys, and so we're all different places. So those of you who are TBMs, I know maybe you heard some things today that you weren't too crazy about, but it's important that Bernadine's voice get heard. It's also important that she kind of gives us the context. There's so many more questions I'd like to ask, and I do want to maybe make this an irregular series in which maybe when there's developments of the court case or interesting things that happen, that we can come back on and talk about that. Does that sound like a plan, guys?
Sounds great.
And we are limited with our time today. Of course, you're on the road. You're in your truck. You're literally in your truck. We had a little technical glitches now and then, but we did it. I'm hopefully you can get your phone charged. And Rebecca, I want to thank you, by the way, as well for being able to come on and co-host today.
Yeah, it was such an interesting discussion. And I wanted to very quickly plug a book. And I think, Steve, you might even want to consider having this author on. There's a book called When the Moon Turns to Blood. And it is about religious extremism in Christianity with a little bit of emphasis on Mormonism. It's written by someone who's never been a Mormon, but an incredible author named Leah Sottile. And it really delves into, like exactly you said, those underlying currents of things that can make this happen in a very impartial way. So I would suggest to anybody that wants to just dive a little bit more into the concept of religious extremism and this trial and some of the details, When the Moon Turns to Blood. And I think it'd be awesome to have her on sometime, Steve, because she's wonderful.
Yeah, and she's actually been at the trial.
I had heard that she was there. Absolutely. So, yep. Wow. Shout out to Leah.
Yeah.
I need to order.
Yep. Well, Bernadine McCandless, thank you so much for joining us today. And hopefully I pronounced your name correctly.
You did.
Great.
You did. Thank you,
awesome.
Steve.
It's wonderful to have people who are fans of my program, who then eventually get to be guests on my program. I think it's a wonderful thing when that kind of thing happens. I wish it was under better circumstances, but I think it's important that you gave us some context, you gave us some background. There's a lot to unpack in this episode, and there's a lot more that we can cover in future in dialogues as well, because we're just really at the start of this whole thing. And of course, we got Chad Daybell coming down the pike too. So we're going to have this irregular conversation. And then I think what's so important for you, Bernadine, is that you were there and you know the culture so well. And then Rebecca, you have been following it very closely as well. I think you guys will give some great insights to the audience. So audience, what do you think? Would you like for us to do this more frequently, cover the Daybell trial? I think it's worth something to have a conversation with. It does have an impact on Mormon culture. It's something, the biggest story in the Mormon Corridor, if not on the country going on. So we're going to just offer our 2 cents into this endeavor as well. I just want to thank all of you. Just a reminder, Mormon Book Reviews has our merch store. You can get hot chocolate mugs. You got your hot chocolate mug. You can get ball caps and all sorts of merchandise. Check that out, mormonbookreviews.com. For those of you who'd like to financially support us on PayPal and on Patreon, there's links there. I want to thank all the people who are contributing to the channel. And just remember, the most important thing, folks, is this. Remember, all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.